Hello and welcome to the Varietal Show. My name is Rory, and you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page. Varietal Show is where we create stuff together, like we write together. And it's a little bit informative on how to write, but it's mostly about getting into the actual process of just being creative with words and ideas and stories and characters. And if that's not a thing you typically do, I would encourage you to give it a try. If you are a person who is not watching this live, so it's harder to participate, obviously, down in the description below, there will be timestamps. And you click on those timestamps, it'll cut you ahead to whatever you want to do. So if you want to skip this sort of talking in the beginning, you can easily do that by skipping ahead to the start of the lit game. If you want to skip the explanation of the lit game, or you want to skip the whole lit game, just see what we came up with, you can absolutely do that. That'll be timestamped, but it won't be done if it's live, and for me, it's live right now. Who's in the chat? Big Drew's in the chat, and so is GS. Hello and good evening. You guys are battling it about who is first. Big Drew says, "How do you always beat me to GS?" Because GS said good evening first. And then it corrects himself and says, I mean good evening, GS. And Big Drew says, "I was just playing a video game." That's a lot of trumpet for this Saxy Hour, Roartown Massacre. Big Drew, what video game were you playing? Because obviously we're going to be talking about games. I have been playing a lot of Elden Ring. And that is why, one reason why this is on my mind. So, I will say that what we're doing today is time consuming. So I'm not going to spend much time on our intros or anything like this. I'm going to get right to our premise. I'm going to explain what we're doing for our lit game, and we'll go straight to work fast as we can. We'll see how far we get. I don't actually expect us to finish like a whole dungeon. That's a lot of work for an hour. But I will explain what we're doing, and I hope you guys will have fun. And if you are watching this, I hope that you'll join in the chat and throw your ideas in, because it might feel a little weird at first, but honestly, it's where most of the fun is had. Okay. WWE 2K22. I'm a different brand of nerd. He isn't in chat much anymore, but that's because of scheduling stuff. But Nathan is a big fan of WWE. That's been sort of my window into it. All right. Is 2K 2022 any good? Because I know that's the games had some, let's say, problems from the last couple of years of not being very good quality. You know what I actually remember? I think it was N64. I had a friend who had an N64, and we used to play WWE games when I would go for a sleepover or something. Because I didn't have a game system when I was a kid. And he kicked my ass every time. He was way better than me because he owned it. But I have fond memories of that, and I don't think I've played anything since. Okay. Lit games is where we it's literature games. It's where we have sort of play a game with each other, whether it's cooperative or competitive, depends on how the game is structured, which just amounts to really live writing and creating together. Now, what we're doing tonight is we're going to talk about this idea that dungeons are a story. So let's start with what a dungeon is. It's pretty much probably what you assume it is, but it's also more than that. So dungeons in games, as a concept, comes from the notions of Dungeons and Dragons, the original tabletop RPG, which is the basis of, I'm going to say, 90% of modern games. Video games, anyways. No, there's somebody who's all bent out of shape about that, but I'm going to stand by that. What a dungeon is sort of like a pathway of trials and things to explore, where you kind of get loot, fight things, or sneak past things, and eventually there's usually like a big baddie at the end or something. And traditional D&D back in like the 80s and so on was really just wandering through. You turn left, you turn right. There was a bunch of text-based adventures on Commodore 64 and all of that. And in its simplest form, it's a dungeon, which are like sort of prisons under a castle. And so it could be that you were trying to break someone out. It could be an abandoned castle. and there's still some things roaming in the dungeons and so on. And so you have to go down there and get the gold or save your friend or whatever it is. In recent years, though, Dungeons has just expanded to any sort of like loops and sequences of stuff that you go through as a player. You know, it can be as abstract as Persona 5, where you're going into people's minds and fighting with their bad feelings and memories and so on, going through the layers of their mind, which is usually structured as like a house or themed around them or something. It could be an actual above ground castle, not a literal dungeon. It could be some old lab in a sci-fi setting. Resident Evil is kind of that way, I think. They go through these hospitals and stuff. It's essentially dungeons, but they're, you know, maybe a police department or something. So, the thing is, the concept of a dungeon in gaming is really a story concept as much as it is anything else. So, what do I mean by the idea that a dungeon is a story? Is a thing called environmental storytelling, which video games didn't invent, but pretty much cornered the market on and did the most innovation with. Environmental storytelling is where, if you imagine this, you show up to, let's say, a war zone after a war happened, and you're finding out the story the way, like, a detective finds out what happened in a murder through sort of the forensics of the scene. Except obviously you're not being that deliberate. You're just moving through and you might notice, oh, everyone has their heads cut off in this room, so it must have been executions here. Or, you know, you go to the next room and there's like no blood in it and everything's covered in gold, and it looks like there might have been somebody in the bed there. Then you sort of go, well, this must have been like a royal's room or something like that, and he must have gotten out. Like, it's sort of figuring out the events that occurred based on what's lying around, what's on the walls, how the doors are arranged, where skeletons are. It's a type of storytelling, and it's a really neat type of storytelling. And so, because what we do on this program is we just kind of look at storytelling and try to write some stuff, I am going to walk you through some basics, and I think we should make a tiny little dungeon. I think you guys will have fun with it. Okay, so Big Drew says, by the way, every GameStop I've ever been to has asked if I've ever played BioShock. My first and last name are the same as the villain. I have not, but I go to Comic-Con as villain Andrew Ryan. 2K22 is good so far. I just started yesterday, but the graphics are the best I've ever seen in this type of game. And yes, 2K20 was hot garbage. Yeah, I think that's the one I heard. In fact, they didn't even release a 2K21. Yeah, because I think they switched developers because it was just so bad. They did that weird, like, big-headed thing. That, like, almost mobile game. Good graphics make all the difference. I think it depends on the game. Like, for a game where you're trying to be, you know, a wrestler, I think it matters more. You know, you want the realism. Okay, so to do this, we're going to do two things. I have here what's called a dungeon map doodler. And you can find this at dungeonmapdoodler.com if you are the type of person who wants to do that. And what this allows me to do is to... Let's get it on the right thing here. This allows me to create, you know, an overhead map of a basic little dungeon. And I'll sort of show you how these things get structured, because I play D&D, by the way, and I also DM, Dungeon Master D&D. I've mentioned that on the show before. So let's start with the absolute most basic thing we have to decide, which is a dungeon is usually basically an industrial building, or a prison, or an asylum, or something like that. But it can be pretty much anything. We need to determine what its original purpose is. All the logic of how everything is laid out, where quarters are, where guardhouses are, whether there's traps in the floor and stuff, has to make sense in the context of what that thing was designed to do. So, you know, for example, in the games Fallout, which are about a post-apocalyptic society, as sort of RPG where you play around. Most of the dungeons are vaults that people locked into when atomic war destroyed the world. And now it's a few hundred years later and people are out wandering the wasteland. And sometimes you go into these vaults that have been opened up, or some aren't open until you get there. So you find people there and stuff. But because of that, there's things you assume you'll find, like a place to eat and a place to sleep. And because they're made by the same company, which is a game lore thing, you expect them to be laid out in some similar ways. Big Drew says they built a whole new gaming engine, revamped the regular story mode, added additional story modes, added new user design creations, fluid animation is much better. Yeah, I think fighting games are all about animation, right? Like, people who complain that, for example, Elden Ring doesn't have the best resolution on its, whatever. Who cares? It's got more fighting animations that look cooler than any game I've ever seen, and that's what it's about. It's about the movement. Okay, so, for example, I'll give you guys some examples here. You could say it was a sewer management facility. We don't have to do it in, like, old times either. We could do futuristic as well. Could be a robot factory. It could be is that it? Is that I'm done as a writer. Sewage management robot factory, and that's all I got. What else? What are some other, like, industrial buildings and so on you can think of, chat? The sewer management robot factory. Trying to think of different eras here. Could be like a mine. A mine is a really classic one. It could be a natural cavern that maybe something has gone to occupy it. It could be something cool in D&D that happens a lot that I did in game recently is tunnels bored by a large creature. It's like a worm that digs through the earth. But you need an original purpose. And then what we're going to do, and since I'm sure people are still wrapping there, fish plant's a good one. I like that. Fish plant. Like a fishery or fish processing plant. Big Drew is right. Nuclear reactor is a right one. I think I said that wrong. Nuclear reactor. Okay, and then something has to have happened. So, for example, maybe it's just defunct and left abandoned. Maybe it was irradiated in a war, then abandoned. I mean, it's got to be kind of abandoned. I mean, it doesn't have to be abandoned. It could be serving its original purpose, which is a wicked one. So, like, it could be a dungeon for enemies of the kingdom or something. Big Drew says magma tubes left behind. Wow. By a villainous organization bent on world domination. Exactly. Lava tubes. I mean, it doesn't have to be a wicked place, but it often is. Or it could be infested by alien bugs, or overtaken by raiders, or had an industrial disaster and is now haunted by the victims. So, in other words, you have this thing that it is, and something happens that does it, that, like, changes it from just being a workplace. GS says, yeah, it was run by Homer, referring to the nuclear plant. So why is it scary? I mean, it's sort of going to come from its things, but it could be filled with ghosts, plagued by poisonous plants. leaking radiation, filled with traps put there by new occupants, and so on. So basically what you do, I'm gonna shrink this down again, is you take something, we need the bold. This is Varietal Show's not official but well-known part of the show where you watch me format text. It's a section that should just create a little sting for and put up. Big Drew says a wine cellar under a slave owner's plantation, now overrun by poisonous snakes let loose by the slaves to get even with their captors. Ooh, I like that. Yeah, now you guys are thinking. So then the thing is, the last thing you have to figure out is why would anyone want to enter? And that can be things like, somebody is taken hostage, which is probably the rarest version of it, honestly. Somebody's taken hostage, a valuable item lost or stored intentionally in there. That's the most common, I would say. Occupants are causing trouble for local towns, so you get hired to get rid of them. Or some source of knowledge or power is rumored to be there, i.e., or sorry, not i.e., e.g., a legendary sword, a tome of terrible curses, a secret microchip, or a special metal, etc. An old fitness gym, a professional wrestling gym haunted by the ghosts of legends past. Well, that's fun, isn't it? The only problem I'm going to have with that, Drew, so you'd have to play a big part in it, is I don't know much about wrestling, so I'm not going to be able to pull the names out of my head. Like, I think I knew a period of time from like 98 to 2001, and I knew it very thinly. Like, as in it was background noise. Okay, so that's just some ideas we have. The only problem I have with a gym, well, I do like that idea, is I don't think it has a lot of complex locations. So, like, the reason why industrial buildings are good is because you can create kind of winding pathways and interesting settings and stuff. I do like the idea of a fishery. The one thing that really kind of defines a dungeon is it has to have something that makes it so it would be hard for them to get out. So, like, it can't be somewhere where they can just jump out a window, because then there's no tension. You can just run out into the world. So GS is an old space launch, like an old missile tube. Ooh, I like that. If you've ever seen one of those are great. So let's get going on this, because this could go on forever. Dungeon 1. An old missile launcher. Because those things have layers and layers in them. So, let's say that we were going to do that. So the first thing we need is rooms for its original purpose. And then we need to think about, like, what is going on with it now. Yeah, hospitals are good. I've seen a few hospitals. Okay, so rooms for original purpose. So there would be, like, vents for the fire. So we would know that there'd be a lot of sort of venting down there. This is without me Googling and doing a bunch of background checking, just on a guess is what's there. There'd be a lot of stairs and catwalks to move around. I'm going to say there's a guard station near the top that, you know, checks people. Let's say that locks are digital card swipes. Security cameras. These aren't rooms, obviously, so maybe I'll just put this under features. There's probably, actually, a janitorial space. Because, you know, they still got to clean stuff up. Fuel storage, yeah. GS says fuel storage. Fuel storage, bins, and area. Vents, absolutely, yeah. Vents for the fire, and vents that would allow air to come in, which means it's something they can crawl around in. Janitorial space. Big Drew says a citywide network of underground tunnels used to Shanghai foreign soldiers during war, which is now haunted by these soldiers and their war canines, based on my hometown's Shanghai tunnels. I am not familiar with those. However, I think we could say that there is a connection to this missile launch tube. I'm thinking of those deep ones that go on the ground. So maybe there's a secret Shanghai tunnels. Well, I don't know. Is Shanghai the right word? Let's just call them secret tunnels. To a network of other missiles and bunkers. Okay. Give me a second here. GS says mezzanines with glass to overlook work areas. Very good. Okay. So that's enough room for us to get started. So let's look at this in terms of layers, because it's obviously going to be a layered one. And this program actually gives me the ability to add layers. So let's get rid of this. Unfortunately, the eraser... Oh, I can snap to grid. Okay, that's good. Nope, it's not snapping to grid. That much is clear. Well, let's at least increase its size. All right, so let's say this is a guard shack, and let's say that the way you get into it is you climb down a ladder through a hatch, because that seems like a good sort of start. This will be room A. Okay, so then I think it's probably pretty obvious that what we need here is a circle. how do I make it circle? Okay, this is a circle. Okay, good. All right. For some reason, none of these systems ever do a particularly good job with circle building. I think that should be bigger. Come on. Oh my god. This unintuitive zoom system. It's not the first time I've encountered this kind of system. Alright. Come on. Come on. Alright. Are you gonna work or no? Gonna be kinda off? Whatever, I can't be picky. Okay, and then we'll have sort of in the center of that what is, I would call, like, where the missile is. Do that again. There we go. Which means that we can have some pathways around the side. Okay, so this first room here, which we'll say kind of overlooks an area. Let's decide what's going on there from our collection of rooms. We have first room A, which is a guardhouse. I actually have a little stamp here so I can add some stuff. It is stuff that's like made for more traditional D&D, of course, but we'll add some desks. Okay, so the way that you sort of construct a dungeon for, let's say, D&D's purposes is we would go like this. Room A. The room is small and windowless. So you put a little description. Windowless with concrete walls. They have cracks. Well, actually, before I say that, we have a structure. Now, what happened? So going back to our idea here, what happened and why is it scary? Here's what I think happened, based on what Big Drew was saying and so on. Let's do the backstory. And guys, you can absolutely join in on this part. So the backstory is, there was a war about 50 years ago. The end of this war yeah, Big Drew, there's rolling tables. If you want to just Google like dungeon generators, you can do it that way as well. Big Drew says a Star Wars like moon-based structure called the Unalive Orbiter or Unalive Orbiter. What would be we can certainly do that. What would be the story there? There was a war about 50 years ago. The end of this war was marked by a launch of the full battery of coastal missiles. However, because there were fears that spies might tip off the enemy, no warning was given before the launches were initiated. Results sorry, the results of this was that anyone working in or near the missile launch sites were incinerated or left to die. It's not how you spell incarcerated? No, incinerated. Whoops, wrong button. Oh, I see. Death Star. Oh, I see. The unalive orbiter. I don't get jokes when I'm on stream, partially because I don't have the context of people's faces and whatever. But also because there's like so many things I'm trying to keep my attention on that my brain never seems to pick up on jokes. Generally speaking, in normal life, I'm pretty quick on jokes, but not on stream. They now haunt as what's their name? Wraiths hunt as wraiths, looking to seeking revenge on the living and hoping to destroy all. Just as we're not Jeopardy level contestants here. Speak for yourself. I'm a genius. Okay, so here's the backstory I cooked up. If you guys have things you want to add to it, let me know. There was a war about 50 years ago. The end of this war was marked by a launch of the full battery of coastal missiles. However, because there were fears that spies might tip off the enemy, no warning was given before the launches were initiated. The result of this was that anyone working in or near the missile launch sites were incinerated and left to die. They now hunt as wraiths seeking revenge on the living and hope to destroy all. However, it also means rare and classified technology, extremely valuable in the post-war world, rare and classified is still locked away in its vaults. Any sufficiently bold explorer could find great wealth if they were to brave the wraiths. Now here's the thing. We don't tell, if you're running a D&D game or something, we don't tell our players any of this, right? What we do is in those descriptions of the rooms, we need to get these story points out. So the question is, what does a place look like when it gets filled with fire from an unexpected launch? So going back to our little guard room here, room A. The room is small and windowless with concrete walls. There are metal desks left behind. Warped. And peeled of their paint. the barred window. No, I said it was windowless. Field of their paint. Big Drew is running a grift on GS here. Says, I'm a 2-day Jeopardy champion. GS says, no, really? Big Drew says, oh yeah. I was playing along at home and won no money, but that part isn't important. The room is small and windowless concrete walls. There are metal desks left behind and warped and peeled of their paint. There was once a sturdy door. To the catwalk ahead. It's one word. But it is twisted and charred. On the ground nearby, you find a half melted badge on the ground next to some ash. All right. Okay, so the room is small and windowless with concrete walls. There are metal desks left behind, warped and peeled of their paint. There was once a sturdy door. There clearly was once a sturdy door to the catwalk ahead, but it is now twisted and charred door frame, let's say. On the ground nearby, you find a half-melted badge next to some ash. Okay. So what I'm doing then is, if the rocket launched and they're in, first of all, I think the room would be fairly secure because it's the place where you check, your last place that you check before you let people go forward. So on our map here, this is where you enter, and at least the main way that you would enter. Big Drew has a good description here. I'm going to add in. The door was, let's say the hatch door is that way. I think that makes sense for the hatch. Because what I'm trying to show is that the door frame out into the main tube got melted away by the rocket flame, right? But I can't come out and say that, so instead what we do, and this is what environmental storytelling really is, I just show people it, and they have to piece it together. So the door, once bright and yellow, has faded. The hatch, I guess this would go earlier. The hatch to the ladder into this room is clearly once bright yellow, but has faded with time and grown a rusty facade. The room itself, let's add that in, is small. All right. Okay, so what you guys like, how do you tell a story this way? Well, you want to think about what's happening with each person in this room by, like, who would have been in that room, and when this event starts happening, what's it going to do? You also need to start thinking about, like, how are we going to introduce the idea of wraiths, these ghostly figures filled with rage, and indicate that they're there. So let's go to this next room on our map here, which we will call room B. And we'll say this is one of those mezzanines. I'm actually going to increase the font size here a fair bit. There we go. Let's say this is the mezzanine where they used to sort of overlook the cone, and they could extend out a catwalk around the side here that would allow them to do work on the missile. So that's like its original purpose. Given our story, what can we work into a room that would have been sort of mechanics overlooking the nose of it? So obviously it would get a good blast of fire, because it doesn't have really the benefit of vents. It's near the top where the doors would have been open. So, like, I suspect this would probably be higher ranking people. Typically in these kinds of structures, I would think that the higher ranking people have to climb less stairs and so on. And it's a viewing platform as well as a place where they can get out and work. So, room B. I think the first thing is it's probably got its front windows shattered and maybe even its floor melted away a bit. You see, there was once sturdy, bulletproof or I guess armored glass. Armored glass at the front of this room. But now it is shattered and its floor is half melted and bending towards a precipitous edge. Yeah, that's what I thought. I think there's another eye. The drool of its metal pointing down into an endless, to a seemingly endless abyss. The only name visible on the half-melted name tag was Clive. Based on what was left of the picture, you could tell that liver-spotted white man was poorly endowed with hair. I like that. A picture. So maybe they could, like, find it in a desk or something. Or, yeah, they could find... You know what they could find? It's a little grim, but also who cares? Oh, Holly's house is here. Hello, Holly's house. GS says, oh, we're doing environmental storytelling. Why don't you just say so? Why didn't you just say so? I'm assuming that's sarcasm. You see, there was once a sturdy armored glass at the front of this room. Next to the remains of a, let's say, tool cabinet. You see to the tortured, to the flame bent? Sure. Another way to say melted frame of a tool cabinet. You see a huddled figure half mummified by time and half burned away. Well, let's do another way of saying that. Half mummified by time. Or, you see a huddled figure. I'm trying to say something specific here. Okay, so next to the flame bend frame of a tool cabinet, you see a huddled figure. Or at least the parts that were covered by whatever heat, by whatever fire consumed the room. It wears a mostly burned, white-colored shirt with a half-melted name tag. And then I can work that in. Flame scarred. Yeah, I like that. We'll use that one later because we're going to need a lot of ways to describe. Based on what was left of the picture, you could tell he was a liver-spotted white man poorly endowed with hair. Okay. Let's shrink this down a bit. So, I mean, if you're asking, GS, because I see you said yes, sarcasm. Basically, the idea, I hope it's starting to become clear as we do it, which is usually the case, is instead of coming right out and saying something, like I said, it's sort of like setting up a crime scene for people to interpret. And then from that, they figure out a story based on who's huddled where and what they have on them and damage in the room and, you know, are the alarms still buzzing a bit? Those all tell you like something went wrong and it seems like nobody expected it. Like those are the ways that environment starts to tell you story. Just says a control panel somewhat melted with a temperature gauge frozen at a terrible temperature. Oh, I like that. Now you're thinking like it. His hand is melted to some control panel. Mostly destroyed by rust and heat. But there remains a temperature gauge frozen at 65,000 Kelvin. I don't know. What's the temperature of a rocket fire? Let's say 6,500 Kelvin. I think 65,000 is probably a bit much. Whoops. GS says, I genuinely like this working backwards from visual cues. You would probably like more video games than you think. That's a lot of what a lot of video games are. I mean, you can just go through and smash things, but if you're a person who's interested in stuff. So, like in Elden Ring, for example, there was one I really liked. It just looked like a cavern in the side of a cliff, and it had some wolves in it, and so you're like, well, it's just, a naturally occurring wolf thing. Wolf den. But then you jump down in a hole, and you suddenly see man-made structures. They're like big posts, very royal and large. You're like, whoa, okay. Because it's literally at the bottom of a very tall cliff, underground. And so you jump down these posts, and you get to a place, and you can see that there is remains of people who got trapped down there, and some other wolves who've been trapped down there as well, who look a little scrawnier than the wolves up higher. And you keep going down these sort of little breaks in the surface and whatever that give you these big pillars, until eventually you suddenly open into this room that was clearly once like a big royal courtyard, but it's all flooded now and worn away, and there's bats and stuff in it. And when you get down to the very bottom of it and you go into another room near this sort of old courtyard, you see there's one of these old automaton guards, this big giant thing, and it gets up because it's just set to protect people from this gate that's completely covered in rock and obviously like 1,000 years old, but it still has its programming, and it gets up and you have to fight it for nothing really. Like, it's just in the way. And that tells you a story of there was once like a castle here, and something happened in the land where it got buried over by a lot of rock. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of what's fun about games, is that. Big Drew says, all it took was one hatch to fail and the base was doomed, sort of like the Death Star. GS says, or the Titanic. I genuinely like this. Oh, I already read that. Not really, GS. Titanic had compartment breaches after the initial hull. It dotted along the side, right? I bow to your engineering. I just watched a lot of documentaries on the Titanic. Yeah, that's true. Okay. The wolves killed that family, and Carol Baskin definitely fed her husband to a tiger. His hand is melted to some control panel. Rust and heat. No. Okay. There are stairs forward. They have broken off. There's a door to the side. That is half welded shut. Okay, so going back to our map, we have our room A and we have a room B. Let's say that there's a room here. I'm kind of running out of space for it. We'll say that this is broken off down here. But where's my room tool? I'll say like there's a door here. Let me just get some more clearly defined walls. No, that's not at all what I wanted you to do. There we go. Finally. That took a minute. Go. Now I have a little passageway. So then the question is, what is that room? And I think this room should just be a transition room of stairs that take you down to the next level. So, how do I do that? Layer 2. Well, layer 2 is a fine name for it. And I think I can make it so layer 1 is invisible. I don't know if there's any way to like cut and paste in this. I don't think there is, unfortunately. So let's go down to layer 2. I don't know why B of all things is whatever. Big Drew says this reminds me of the create a level feature in Time Splitters 2 because it's an extremely dated interface. I'm guessing here. I can't remember the exact size of the room. Why didn't it put a shape on it? Yes, it's called layer 2. I know. Good for you. Give me a shape. Oh, this is so compelling. This is what YouTube is made for. Not sure why it's not doing that. Let me try this. Let's see if it's... Nope. Okay. Do you want me to change the name? It's worked before. Not sure why it's being such a jerk. Now... Oh, I know what it's doing. Duh. Okay, I think I fixed it. There we go. I mean, I kind of know it. I didn't play a lot of time splitters or anything. I won't oversell this. Okay, so let's say you come down. I'm sorry for that. That was terribly boring. Let's say you come down these stairs and you come through here, and this is a room. Big Drew says, "I, Big Drew, I'm a dork. I just thought you should all know." Hey man, nothing wrong with being a dork. I hope. I mean, because I am one. We'll do one more room here because we're just about out of time. So let's say you go downstairs because we haven't established our wraiths. So let's say that those stairs down are this is the room right off that level, so it goes down those stairs to the next room. This room is a set of concrete stairs. They are littered with bodies huddled into each other. There is none of the burning of the burn marks are melting here. The figures that fill the stairs wear blue coveralls, untouched by flame. So my idea is this is like the people that were able to get out like really quick and unfortunately I guess would have just starved to death because the door was welded shut. Hey man, if you want wraiths, you gotta go dark. Figures that fill the stairs wear blue coveralls untouched by flames. You see for a moment a sickly blue light emanate from somewhere below. But as quick as it's there, it's suddenly gone. Big Drew is singing "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor." When you reach the bottom, or sorry, the next level, there's another welded shut door. A few scraps of MRE wrappers And a figure missing its legs. There we go. The music in the background combined with the story is kind of giving my Fallout vibes. Yeah, that's actually quite true. So if you guys don't know, Fallout works, the world is built on this basic assumption that the electronic era that sort of came up in the 50s and so on didn't really happen. Instead, we basically only relied on nuclear power. And so it has this 1950s aesthetic, but everything runs on some version of nuclear power. And the reason they do that is, of course, so that when bombs drop and you come back out later from your shelter, a bunch of things still work, right? You don't need the electronics grid. Okay, I don't think we have time to do much more. I'm sorry that you guys didn't get much chance to participate. I do feel a little bad about that. But let's look back at what we have, and we will we'll do the little section for people who come here and just skip ahead. So we'll gotta set this up on the right layer here, and there we go. Okay, so I will, we'll sort of read back what we have, but I'm going to do it sort of out of order. I'm going to read the 3 rooms we created first, their description, and show you a little bit on the map. And then I'll go back and tell you what the actual backstory is and see if you could figure it out as we went along. See if our environmental storytelling was working. So, room A, the hatch to the ladder into this room. So, basically what it is it's an abandoned missile silo. And room A is up and above here, and let's see what it says. The hatch to the ladder into this room was clearly once bright yellow, but has faded with time and grown a rusty facade. Its once yellow painting a fading reminder of what once was. The room itself is small and windowless, with concrete walls. There are metal desks left behind, warped and peeled of their paint. There clearly was once a sturdy door to the catwalk ahead, but it is now a twisted and charred doorframe. On the ground nearby, you find a half-melted badge next to some ash. And then you can move along the catwalk here to room B. So let's see what room B says. Room B, you see there was once a sturdy armored glass at the front of this room, but now it is shattered and its floor is half melted and bending towards a precipitous edge, the drool of its metal pointing down into a seemingly endless abyss. Next to the flame-bent frame of a tool cabinet, you see a huddled figure, at least the parts that were covered by whatever fire consumed this room. It wears a mostly burned white-colored shirt hung with a tag. The name visible on the half-melted name tag was Clive. Based on what was left of the picture, you can tell he was a liver-spotted white man, poorly endowed with his hair. His hand is melted to some control panel, mostly destroyed by rust and heat, but there remains a temperature gauge frozen at 6,500 Kelvin. There are stairs forward, but they have broken off. There's also a door to the side that is half-welded shut. And if you manage to get through that door and half-welded shut, it takes you to our final room. This room is a set of concrete stairs. They are littered with bodies huddled into each other. There is none of the burn marks or melting here. The figures that fill the stairs wear blue coveralls untouched by flames. You see for a moment that a sickly blue light emanates from somewhere below, not blue. But as quick as it's there, it's suddenly gone. When you reach the next level, there's another welded shut door, a few scraps of MRE wrappers, and a figure missing its legs. And for those who were who jumped ahead to this, here was the backstory. It's an old missile launcher, and there was a war about 50 years ago. The end of this war was marked by a launch of the full battery of coastal missiles. However, because there were fears that spies might tip off the enemy, no warning was given before the launches were initiated. The results of this was that anyone working in or near the missile launch sites were incinerated or left to die. They now hunt as wraiths, seeking revenge on the living and hoping to destroy all. However, it also means rare and classified technology, extremely valuable in the post-war world, is still locked away in its vaults. Any sufficiently bold explorer could find great wealth if they were brave enough, if they were to brave the wraiths. Big Drew says, I'm really enjoying this concept. We've created a dark Wally without any character. I agree, yeah. If nothing else, like if you're not the kind of person who wants to go and build dungeons or whatever, because it is a lot of work to do it, and you need people to play it, right? But if nothing else, maybe it'll change the way that you look at games, if you're the type of person who plays games where you walk around. Because a lot of the time, the main way that you write in games is how you lay things out and what you put there and where you put bodies and, you know, whatever else. Like, games are always trying to tell you stuff. I think probably a game that I think succeeds really well at its environmental storytelling is Metroid. Metroid is extremely atmospheric. There's been Metroids pretty much since the 80s, the most recent one being Metroid Dread, which is an excellent game, by the way. Unfortunately, you have to have a Switch, so if you don't have a Switch, you're out of luck. But Metroid, basically, the character never talks. There's very few cutscenes, and what are they're fairly cryptic. So the way that you figure out where you are and what's going on is all the backgrounds. It's side-scrolling, so all the backgrounds. And you sometimes see stuff move in it, or you'll go by it once and there's a tube with sort of a suspended creature, and then you come back later and it's broken and there's nothing there. Like, it tells you stuff in its environment all the time. And if you're paying attention, you get the story. They don't even really need to say a word. And it's very cool. Big Drew says the space we're creating should be the setting for a next Halloween build your own venture. That's a good idea. Maybe we will do that. That's months away though. Okay, well, I think we've gotten the point across. That is environmental storytelling, and that's what I mean by dungeons tell a story. Dungeons are a story. The point of a dungeon is as you move through it, if you care to, there should be a story to it. You know, a big thing, there's a reason why there should be a story to it. And I just want to close out on this because games are about gameplay, not about story. As much as I'd like to say they're just about story. However, what I mean is gameplay is primary. When a person's playing a game, they're there to play a game. However, if you're going through a dungeon, you're trying to predict what's in this room, or whether something valuable's here, or whether it's a place worth going, or whether there's going to be wraiths in that room or whatever. The logic of the story of that space is how a player is able to make informed decisions or guesses or puzzle it out. And if it's all fairly random, and there isn't any reasoning behind it that they could figure out that would help them about what the space is or how it's being used right now, then they can't really play it as a game. It's a constant guessing game of just poking around at things. And that's no fun. A dungeon should be a puzzle, and a big part of figuring out that puzzle and predicting what the dungeon will bring is by figuring out the narrative of it. So that's all I'll say. Like, narrative is therefore extremely supportive of how it becomes a game in the first place to travel through a dungeon. Okay, that's enough of me blabbity blabbing. Thank you so much, Big Drew and GS and Holly's House for coming by. And for anybody who's hanging out in the background, thank you so much for coming by. If you enjoyed this, let me know, because I can do more stuff about how we tell stories through things like D&D. I don't traditionally do that much because, you know, I don't really write like D&D modules and stuff like that. At least not as a, like, on a professional level. But I'd be more than happy to talk more about interesting ways that we tell stories in the modern era. Beyond that, remember to like us if you liked us, and subscribe us if you are a person who likes to subscribe to things. I don't know. Big Drew says, months away or not, you created something memorable that people enjoyed. So yeah, but will I remember or will I forget in a week and then be like, I don't know. I forget so many things. But you're right, Big Drew. I will certainly look into it. And if you guys want to add anything to it, go right ahead. If you ever never look at this as this is Rory's stuff. If you want to do something with it, do something with it. You can even send it back to me in the next stream, and I can add to it if you want. If you guys want to keep building out rooms. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming by. I gotta cash out the shop, which means you can go where you want, but you can't stay here. The shop is closed. Get out of my shop.